Scaling your business is not for the faint of heart. You almost need a second pair of hands just to manage the hiring process when expanding your team. If you're tired from all the heavy lifting required when it comes to scaling your business and you happen to be using Dubsado to streamline your client process, then why not use it in the hiring process as well? In this video, I'm going to show you how I use the features and benefits of Dubsado to streamline the hiring process I used for my last few team members. Hi, I'm Nicole Johnson and I own Digital Made Simple. I help busy entrepreneurs streamline and simplify their business so that they can serve their clients in a beautifully branded way. Now, I've used this process for my last 3 hires, and each and every time I find additional improvements along the way. At this point, my business is a 3-person team and it's continuing to grow. So having a solid process in place will help me get through the not so fun process of evaluating, communicating with, and ultimately the fun process of hiring my next team member. Now, if you like what you hear in this video and you think this is a novel way to use Dubsado, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will make sure I'll keep the goodness coming. Now, I'm going to take you to my computer and show you how scaling your business can be easy with Dubsado. So I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly how I set up my Dubsado for the hiring process. Now, here's the full list of steps that I took, but your systems and your process may be different, so take that with a grain of salt. I tend to err on the complex side of things, so you may need fewer steps than this. But just like with everything in terms of workflows with Dubsado, you have to determine what your workflow is. Then I'm going to show you how to set up your project status, create custom mapped fields, set up forms with expirations, set up schedulers, canned emails, contracts, and do onboarding. So I've mapped out my process here, and as you can see, it's pretty linear, but with a few twists and turns. I'm going to zoom in so that you can see exactly what the process is. So the first thing that I had set up is an online application, which I used the Dubsado lead capture form in order to embed that into my website. Then I wanted to make sure that as soon as someone applied, they would get an email confirming that I received their application. Then we went through a process, my team and I, to screen candidates. And then for those candidates who we were really interested in, we invited them for an interview. Now, those who we didn't really have a lot of interest in, we put them kind of in a separate pile, and we were going to send them a decline email, but we wanted to wait until the end because, with some people, they may be on the cusp, and if the people who we were really interested in fell through, then we can always have a group of people who we can go back to and say, okay, so let's see what these other candidates have to say. And so we did keep the decline emails until the very end. So then we had those people who we interviewed and passed the interview process, we invited a select few of those to do a skills assessment, which would help me to understand exactly how they would operate with examples of tasks that would commonly be had for that role in my organization. For that one person who passed the skills assessment with the most integration in my team, that's when we would extend an offer. And I really wanted to make sure that this offer was done face-to-face, so I extended the offer using a meeting with the scheduler. We then sent any post-interview and initial rejections to anybody who was not successful in the process. Now that the new hire was open to working with me, then we sent them a contract, and also we wanted to design the onboarding process so that it met them where they were. You can't assume that someone knows all of your systems or has the same standard level of knowledge of any one system. So we did a tech evaluation, provided a form for that, and then once that was completed, we could really cater the onboarding process to fit where they were. And of course, we were also requesting a W-9. So when you look at this process, all of this was very easily and very well streamlined using Dubsado. So now let's look at how I set up my project statuses so that it would accommodate actually incorporating job interviews and candidates into my system. So, of course, with my Dubsado install, I primarily use it to manage clients, but we also created 2 additional lead statuses, one being job applicant and one being applicant passed. We also created 3 additional job statuses, right? So one was the interview candidate. So for anyone who we looked at and screened and wanted to offer an opportunity to interview, those would go into the interview candidate pile. And then anyone who was successful throughout the whole process and we wanted to extend the offer and they accepted it, they would then go into the DMS team member pile. And then those who we passed on after the interview process was an applicant declined. Now, in addition to having those project statuses set up, I actually wanted to use a custom mapped field so we could use the role that the person was applying for to fill out certain canned emails and documents such as that. So now usually when you're setting up workflows, that's really the last thing you're going to do. But in order to show you how this process really works, I wanted to show you the workflows first. Now, that's not what I created first, but I'm going to show you those first so that you can see how everything integrates. Now, I created this process in 2 parts. There was the job application part 1 and the job application part 2. The reason why I created 2 parts is because I wanted certain forms to have an expiration date. And I found out the very, very hard way that as soon as a workflow is added to someone's project or to a job candidate's project, the clock starts ticking on that expiration date. And even if you don't approve the form and it's still sitting there, reminder emails will go out for forms that have an expiration date if you don't stop it. So the first form that had an expiration date, I put that in job application part 2 so that certain people who hadn't even passed the screening process would not prematurely get emails about forms that they would never need to fill out. Now, another little tip I have is using icons to delineate different workflows and the accompanying forms and canned emails that are used with them. So I've learned this in one of the advanced trainings in Dubsado, and I really liked it because it really helps me to keep things in track. But so when we talk about job application part 1, it really is about getting the initial applicants all the way through the screening process and the interview process. So basically what we did was make sure that the status of the job applicant was changed immediately. And I'll go ahead and go into it so you can see what I'm talking about. So we wanted to make sure that any lead was made a job applicant. Now, typically you can also set that in the lead capture form, but I just wanted to make sure. Then I added a tag applicant because I do use tags in my Dubsado setup. So then I also wanted to make sure that as soon as someone applied, they received a prompt email letting them know that I received their application. And then we created a couple of to-dos for an initial screening by my team members and then a final review by myself. Then anyone who passed the screening process would actually get sent an appointment scheduler to do the virtual job interview. Once they were sent to the job interview phase, I changed their status to a job, which was the interview phase. And then once that was done and all the interviews were scheduled, we would go to the workflow part 2. Now, notice here that there is a job initial rejection for those candidates. Once you actually have this workflow on your project or in that candidate's project, I use the to-dos to say, okay, if we're going to pass on this, go to the workflow and delete the, job applicant workflow piece, because we're not going to send them to part 2. Or if they did pass the screening process and they were getting an interview, I had a to-do, part of the to-do list here was to remove the initial rejection and generic rejection pieces of it. And then after all was said and done, once they were rejected, they were sent to the lead applicant pass status in Dubsado. Now, I hope you're getting a lot out of what I'm showing you today. And if you are, please comment scale in the comment section so I can know that you're picking up what I'm putting down. Now to go into the job applicant part 2. Now, this set of tasks and automations is for people who successfully completed the interview process, which means that we interviewed them, we wanted to see more from them, wanted to see how they, fared with some of the screening and skills assessments we had in place. So we then initiated this part 2 to deliver that screening assessment. That screening assessment had an expiration date because we wanted people to complete that in a timely manner. And then we paused the workflow, because with so many people going through the hiring process and so many people going through the interview process, it wasn't going to be necessarily clear when someone's going to finish their screening project and when they wouldn't. I didn't want there to be any information being fired off prematurely from when they actually finished the screening assessment. Now, sometimes people can say, oh, well, you could have used until the form was completed, but not everyone who completed the screening form would get a job offer, because that's the next step. The next step would be to send an appointment scheduler for us to have that job offer meeting, so that I can in person offer that person the job, let them know that they were a successful candidate, and talk through, compensation, start dates, things like that in person. Then they were sent a contract, which is why there's an approved step on that, because I can't assume that they accepted the offer. So we did send the employment contract, and I also created a to-do to countersign that employment contract and resend it back to them fully executed. And then we changed the project status to, once the contract was signed, to DMS team. That means they're hired, right? And usually there's one person sitting there, right? So after that, and basically from this virtual job offer all the way down to the first onboarding day, all of this is for the successful candidate, right? Because at this point in the process, I wanted to make sure that I understood where they were from a technology assessment standpoint. We use certain tools and software like Notion, of course, Dubsado, ActiveCampaign. And I wanted to get a sense of, do they feel like they were proficient? Everybody can say that they use these tools, but they may not be proficient. They may not have even heard of it. And so when we're onboarding that person, we can focus more attention on the areas they're less familiar with and allow us to, kind of de-emphasize the things that they are highly skilled at. And so once we completed that technology evaluation, then we actually sent out a scheduler for their first onboarding day. So this is like their first day at work. So we could actually make sure that we are talking to them. And our onboarding process is about 3 or 4 days, actually. So, making sure that, the people who we bring into our team are connected to the correct systems, they have the right passwords. And even if you do know a system, you may not know how I use it. And so getting them to kind of shadow me on how I use certain systems is important as well. For anyone who was not a successful candidate, I would obviously remove all these steps in between after that workflow is paused, and then send them the post-interview rejection. So this rejection, I hate to say that word, but this rejection email is different than those who didn't pass in the initial screening process. With the post-interview rejection, I wanted to make sure that I put some specific reasons why they did not they were not a successful candidate for Digital Made Simple. Whereas the initial screening process, that email was relatively more generic, but it was set to go off after a hire was completely made. So then once that's done, the rejection email is sent, then the project status would be set to applicant declined. So we declined on that applicant. So that's basically it in terms of how the workflow is. I will go into a few of the forms and show you how I set up some of the schedulers. I won't go into a great amount of detail, but how I set up some of the schedulers and some of the forms associated with this hiring process. So as you can see in the schedulers, I set up 3 additional schedules for my hiring process. First was for the candidates who we screened through and we wanted to extend an interview for. And this is just a basic scheduler. There's nothing really too unique about it. There is a very descriptive email around, that we're extending this interview and what to expect during the interview process. And I don't believe there was any form associated with it. There's some reminders with it. So there's nothing really special about it. It's just pretty much a standard scheduler. The other scheduler I provided was the virtual job offer. And again, it's more of a standard scheduler as well. Now, the first onboarding day is a little bit different. Again, the canned emails are, targeted towards where they are in the process. But the difference with this one is that I did connect a form that is the W-9 request form, because I know that I'm probably engaging this person for a longer period of time, maybe a full year. There's likely going to be a chance that I'm going to be spending more than $600 with this person. So, I'm going to need a W-9. So now let's look at some of the forms that I've used to facilitate this hiring process. And as you can see, I have a lot of forms, and I'm like waiting with bated breath when Dubsado comes out with a feature where we can kind of organize our forms a little bit better. You can tell the forms that are associated with the hiring process because they do have the relevant icon for the process that they're related to. So the first one is this job application, and this is a lead capture form, which means I was able to embed it onto my actual website. So the last role that I hired for was a virtual assistant. I wanted to make sure that the person understood how much the pay range is, all the relevant information. So I created a full landing page with the role summary and everything like that on this page. And then at the very bottom, there is this lead capture form where they can actually apply. And so when they do that, this gets sent out and they are then sent an email confirming that we received that application. The next set of forms that I use really come into part 2 of the job application process, and that is the screening assessment, the technology evaluation, and the W-9 request. Now again, remember, this W-9 request is associated with the scheduler for the first onboarding day. But the screening assessment I created to make sure that they understood my organization, my business, had the opportunity to look at my website, kind of get a sense of my brand. And then I provided several questions for them to assess, how would you respond to a customer complaint? How would you respond to a partnership opportunity? And mostly I was interested in why they responded in the way that they did and what their rationale is, because I want to understand what is your thought process, because you may even, respond to a customer or a partnership situation in a certain way that I wouldn't. But if your rationale is novel enough and interesting enough, then I might be interested in what you're saying. And then lastly, I did provide a technology assessment for them to kind of self-assess. Let me know, based on the technology that I use, some of it is heavily used in my organization, some of it's more supportive, some of it's, social media. Then how would you rank yourself from a standpoint of new tool, who this, all the way to expert status activated? So yeah, I wanted to make sure that I understood from them how they felt their proficiency was in the technology that I was using. Now, the W-9 request form is really straightforward. It's just a form with a file uploader so that they can upload their W-9 form, but I will go into the employment contract. Basically, it just has the outline of the scope of their duties, their pay, the fact that we'd have a 90-day evaluation, and their preferred start date that they can self-select. So, allows us to both sign this document and, just really memorialize the fact that they are part of the Digital Made Simple family. And that's it. That's the complete and total process, fully transparently, that I use to have Dubsado manage my hiring process. I found it to be very helpful, and I definitely asked the candidates who were successful through this process how they felt about it, and they really felt like it was great. Now, again, I did experience some technical difficulties when Dubsado sent some forms prematurely to some of the wrong candidates, but all in all, it was a smooth process. We knocked the kinks out of that, and now I feel confident and comfortable with my next hire. Now, let me know in the comments if you're a larger organization and you see some drawbacks to the process that I've shown. Now, part of the reason why I'm scaling my business is because of the overwhelming demand of entrepreneurs like yourself who don't have the time or maybe the inclination to want to tackle the learning curve that comes with implementing a whole Dubsado setup. And that's why I offer Dubsado Made Simple VIP Days. So that means that in one day, yes, one measly day, I will help transform your Dubsado setup into a functioning, highly thriving client management machine. And you'll walk away ready to coast on the foundation we've made without having to beat your head against the wall just to learn the basics. Not only that, but my extensive experience with Dubsado means that I know all the little tricks and workarounds so that you can fit Dubsado to your business versus you having to fit your business to Dubsado. Now, if you want the absolute most out of investing in Dubsado and you are ready to deliver a custom branded experience to your clients, then click the link in the description box below and check out my Dubsado Made Simple VIP Days. You won't regret it.